It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Hello everybody, and welcome to the month of October. This month I'll be covering a bunch of horror icons. Today I'm going to talk about one of my favorite classic horror icons, that being Frankenstein's monster / Dr. Frankenstein. You know, all the Dr. Victor, whatever the hell his name is. There's a big confusion about that, but basically Frankenstein is the name of the doctor as well as the monster. Ha ha ha. Yeah, people say, oh, it's Frankenstein's monster, but the story is literally a metaphor for parenting, so therefore the monster's last name would be, well, Frankenstein, if his father is the doctor, whose also last name is Frankenstein. So I am not going to be one of those people like, oh, I can't call the monster Frankenstein, because there's nothing better to call him. Frankenstein's monster, whatever. He can be called Frankenstein since, you know, it still makes sense, since, like I said, the original book is a metaphor for parenting. And by the way, let's start with the book, because that's a great place to start with a brief history of Frankenstein. And here's the cover of it. Yeah, this is what it looks like. The original cover wasn't very good, but, you know, it was 1818, and the book was published by Mary Shelley, who was only, get this, 18 years old. And she wrote what was considered to be the first science fiction novel at the age of 18. Fucking crazy. Mary Shelley is a very interesting person who has a very interesting family lineage of writers, including her own husband, and oddly enough, she's considered to be the most famous of them all, even though her family was involved in politics. Mostly left-wing stuff, atheistic, and skepticism stuff, which is pretty cool. I like all that crap. But yeah, she basically was pretty interested in things like science from a young age, and all the writing based on her family as well as her own husband. And she decided that she was going to write a book about her science and her own personal feelings of, well, parenthood, specifically motherhood, even though the book's actually about a father and son, technically speaking, with a mom, because it's a guy creating another guy, but whatever. She didn't know her mom, her mom died pretty much shortly after she was born, and she also recently, at the time, featured a miscarriage, so she felt kind of about being a parent, and kind of felt lost. So writing this book and her fascination with science fiction, which is the reason why she wrote the book in the first place. So let's get into it with the original novel. The story in the book isn't too far removed from what most people know about the character. A young scientist named Victor Frankenstein becomes obsessed with creating, well, life again, and he robs graves and sews them together to make a monster. He's supposed to be getting married and all this other stuff, but he doesn't really care at this point. He's obsessed with his creation. But when the creation is finally alive, he gets scared of it. He realizes that he created a monster and runs away, and then forgets about it. However, the monster goes on to live, it gets chased by people, it has no idea what the hell's going on, because it's just basically born life and felt like it's abandoned by its own creator. It does learn stuff eventually through the help of a blind person, nice blind man, helped him to speak, and then that guy dies, unfortunately. So the monster comes back to Frankenstein's life, basically says, you made my life hell because you abandoned me and everyone hates me, so I want to be by myself now, but I need companionships, make me a wife. He's like, okay, I'll do it. But then he's like, then the scientific Victor's like, screw this, I'm not going to help him. If the monster makes more monsters, then they'll take over the world maybe, so I'm going to destroy this wife before he can even get it. So yeah, that makes the monster extremely angry. He's like, since you took mine, I'm going to take yours. So he takes Victor's wife, who we forgot about pretty much, because Victor is not a great husband. And yeah, the monster kills her, but he regrets it. He feels terrible for doing so. And they basically chase each other to Antarctica, where they both die. Frankenstein dies of natural causes while he's in the Arctic, telling it to some random people up there. And the monster sees this, and then he kills himself by jumping into the icy water. It's sad, it's somber, and of course I recommend reading it for yourself, because it goes better into detail than I do. But it's really just about abandonment and all this other stuff. It's great. I love this book. One of the most noteworthy things about the book, compared to what you may think, is that the character doesn't really look like what the character you imagine him to look like. The other thing the monster is described as is being kind of horrid to look at, and being tall and big. Not even really described as having like parts stitched together like that. Well, it's assumed that the parts are put together. They're not really said like, oh, they were stitched together. There's no bolts, and his skin is never described as being as green or anything like that. So yeah, here's the first actually known illustration of the character from the late 1800s here, and yeah, it doesn't really look anything like how you expected it, does it? The first adaptation of the novel came in 1823 with a stage play adaptation called, well, Frankenstein. This one lasted until 1850, and the most notable thing about it is that it introduced a sidekick to Frankenstein, Dr. Victor Frankenstein. He had a hunchback assistant known as Fritz, who most popularly is known as Igor. That's a different character all entirely. But yeah, So that's where that character comes from, this play. It's not an original book. That Hunchback's assistant was only created for the play, and is the only adaptation that Mary Shelley actually saw in person, and apparently was popular enough to last till 1850, which is quite a good amount of time for a stage show, especially back in the day. Due to the novel's popularity and the fact it's in the public domain, there have been many adaptations of the book or characters. At least 430 different films have been made starring or featuring the Frankenstein character, and around 200 TV show episodes and shows have been based off the character, so there's quite a lot out there. So let's go back to the first ever theatrical version. In 1910, we had the first adaptation, which is only 13-12 minutes long, where we see the monster. It looks like a really weird, like, hunchback guy and long fingernails, and it kind of loosely adapts the book, but as I said, it's only 12 minutes long, so it's not a lot there. You can watch it on YouTube right now if you want. It's that short. This film is mostly interesting, bringing the fact it's the first adaptation of this character in film, and the fact that for many years it was thought to be lost until around like 2010 when it was refound again. So that's pretty cool. But in 1931, the character would forever cement itself in pop culture with the Universal 1931 adaptation directed by James Whale and starring Boris Karloff. It's called Frankenstein. This adaptation was wildly popular at the time and actually pretty much is the main cultural zeitgeist for the character, including famous sayings like "it's alive," the way the monster looks and is portrayed, in the Hunchback assistant, all sorts of other things like that, including lightning and the design, the bolts on the neck, the stitched up look, the kind of the faded over comb over, the giant unibrow, the way this posture of the character. It's pretty much everything that you know about the character comes from the Universal version, even if they quote-unquote copyright it, but not for long, because this character's going to the public domain incredibly soon, so haha, take that, Universal. The character of Frankenstein's in the public domain, but the Universal version is currently not in the public domain, alright? Just to clear that up. Very soon, though. Very soon. The movie was pretty popular, even though it had some controversy or some fans of the original book for changing some elements. One, Frankenstein is not appalled by his monster, in fact he really likes him. The monster then goes out in town and he has some good moments, like this one with this little girl, which is not in the book, where he accidentally kills her. It's a great scene, and it's been parodied multiple times because of it. The film ditches the main parenting angle which the original book had and focuses way more on the science aspect of man should not be able to create a monster like that. You know, they do keep some sympathetic elements to the monster. The movie's way more focused on the aspect of it is dangerous to create life and all that other stuff like that. And the film was even so controversial enough to have to be censored in some areas, which is kind of funny since the film really isn't that dark. I mean, it is a horror movie after all, but it's really nothing compared to modern day films. Another strange thing the film decides to do is that they make it clear that the monster is actually abnormal by making the dumb assistant Fritz, who was created for that stage play, as I mentioned before, he accidentally takes the bad brain. He doesn't accidentally, he's an idiot and breaks the normal brain, so he has to take the abnormal brain. So that's why the monster is bad, which doesn't really correlate with the other films in the series, because like I said, they still keep some of the elements of the original monster being sympathetic from the book, but there's their explanations. Oh, he's abnormal. So Dr. Frankenstein is a lot more of a mad scientist in the movie until the very end, where he finally has remorse and he has a giant fight with his monster and his giant windmill, and that's pretty much how the movie ends there. Even though it looks like they both die here, well, because the film is so popular, it ended up being a sequel, so neither of them died. But yeah, Frankenstein ended up being the more popular of the Universal films that came out around 1931, the other one being Dracula, so there would be a rivalry between those two characters in a Universal monster cinematic universe, which I won't be going over too much since there's so much of that, but I must go over the direct sequel to this film because that one is actually even more popular than this one in a way. A couple years after the first movie came out, they made a sequel, which is considered to be better in pretty much every single way than the original, which says a lot. This film is most noteworthy for actually creating the character of the Bride of Frankenstein, who is a character that only appeared very briefly in the book, but also very briefly in the movie. Pretty much the design and aesthetic from this version of the character is what is pretty much known as the character, even if she, like I said, barely appears in the film, and really doesn't even actually come alive in the book itself, but that's pretty funny. With the same cast and director as the previous film, they really set out to be a better, more faithful adaptation of the book by actually having a more sympathetic Frankenstein character who actually does go through some of the scenes of the book. And even in the beginning of the movie, they have Mary Shelley say that the original movie didn't have the right ending. Here's how it actually happened. It's like, ha ha ha, there you go, we had Mary Shelley there, ha ha. See, we were doing it right this time. In the film, the monster is not considered to be the main villain. In fact, they added another evil scientist to be the main villain here, as the monster goes through a lot of the same situations he went for the book, being chased by mobs, constantly being tortured, and even learning how to speak properly through the blind man. It's some pretty iconic scenes. Frankenstein cemented even more so Boris Karloff as the monster in this version of the character into popular culture, more so than in the first movie. Like, he had a really good one, and then he had the second one adapt the book better and make the character even more well known. So of course, what you expect, the character became even more popular, and he would appear in a crap ton more of Universal movies, played only once more by Boris Karloff, who would go on to do more less roles required him being a crap ton of makeup. Ironically, in one of the films, he actually played a scientist opposite to the monster. It's pretty funny. But yeah, since then, Bride of Frankenstein is still considered to be the best and highest rated Frankenstein movie to this day. And due to the fact the character was in the public domain, even if the Universal version technically isn't, there's been many adaptations into the Halloween decorations, which was actually a growing holiday in the United States. Pretty much the Halloween exploded during the early 1900s into the modern day. It's actually kind of a recent holiday. It's an old holiday, but also a kind of a recent holiday in the modern day form, that makes any sense. And Frankenstein would become a fixture of a lot of decorations, along with Dracula and the Wolfman and the Mummy, which are all their Universal monsters that were technically created by Universal. Their versions popularized by Universal, but they kind of existed beforehand, so a lot of people just decorated those characters anyway because they're so popular, especially since, well, they went from scary to not so scary to Universal making so many movies of them. Because in the 1940s, Universal made a crap ton of movies featuring their famous monsters crossing over, including meeting comedic duo Abbott and Costello in a pretty famous movie called Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, which they actually barely interact with Frankenstein. In fact, they interact with Dracula and the Wolfman more in this movie than they do with the actual monster. But you know, this and other stuff made the monsters seem a little bit more comedic, even if the film is pretty great. Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, classic. That's pretty much where the monster begins and ends. Pretty much every version after that has pretty much been based off the Universal version. From famous parody movies like Young Frankenstein, to weird as hell animated movies that are obscure as hell that no one remembers other than me, but there's the random Frankenstein monster parody with these ugly ass kids. Anyways, there's a lot of films. I mean, there's one coming out pretty soon by Guillermo I don't know how to say his name, but he's a great director. He's making a Frankenstein adaptation. It's probably going to be good. There's a lot of other things that go on, but I can go on forever, and will this be short, right? It's brief history. Thank you for watching this. Sorry this wasn't as depth as other stuff, but really it's one of those characters that can go on forever. So if you want me to do more, let me know. Let me know what character you want me to do next for this Halloween marathon. But yeah, this is just the Frankenstein's monster / Frankenstein, or whatever the hell you want to call him. And my recommendation is definitely find a copy of the original novel. It is great, as well as watch the original Universal films. They have a unique charm to them. And I recommend Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. It's a great comedic horror Halloween movie. It's not really horror actually, because it's not really scary, but it's great. I love it. And thanks for watching.